evening. We have a sensational twist this Friday evening, viewers. It's literally a never-seen-before development. In a first of its kind, a top government minister and a very senior BJP leader, one of the sharpest minds really that the party has written a very scathing post. Arun Jaitley is slamming the CBI. Yes, viewers, the union minister is taking on India's premier investigative agency on the back of the action taken by CBI yesterday. Now, if you all know, yesterday CBI filed an FIR booking Chanda Kochar, her husband, and also the Videocon chief VN Dhoot. I'll explain to you what else was there in the FIR, perhaps which is what has triggered this outburst. But I think before I give you any views or we get our experts on, let me first tell you what is it that Arun Jaitley has written in its entirety so that you as a viewer can also decide for yourself what is it that the union minister is saying right now. So here it goes. Arun Jaitley writes in a Facebook post, and I quote, "There is a fundamental difference between investigative adventurism and professional investigation. Investigative adventurism involves casting the net too wide, including people with no means really or even having a common intention to commit an offense, relying on presumptions and surmises with no legal admissible evidence." He further goes on to describe this adventurism and says that this will lead to media leaks. It ruins reputations and eventually invites strictures, not convictions. In the process, the targets are ruined because of harassment, loss of reputation, and financial costs. It costs people their career. On the other hand, professional investigation targets the real accused on the basis of actual and admissible evidences. It rules out fanciful presumptions. There is no personal malice or corruption. It targets the guilty and protects the innocent. It secures convictions and furthers public interests. One of the reasons why our conviction rates are poor is that adventurism and megalomania overtakes our investigators and professionalism takes a back seat. Sitting thousands of kilometers away, when I read the list of potential targets in the ICICI case, the thought that crossed my mind was again the same. Instead of focusing primarily on the target, is a journey to nowhere. And then he writes in brackets, to everywhere being taken. If we include the entire who's who of the banking industry with or without evidence, what cause are we serving or actually hurting? Arun Jaitley ends his blog by saying, "My advice to our investigators, follow the advice of Arjun in Mahabharat. Just concentrate on the bull's eye." Now, take a moment, think about that. He's literally breaking down adventurism in investigation and professional investigation. Let me go across to Vinay Tiwari at this point of time, a consulting editor. Vinay, this is truly unprecedented. I mean, do you, in your experience, remember a top government minister slamming the CBI on such a crucial case?
Never before, Tanvi. I mean, and not just any other minister. I mean, remember, Mr. Arun Jaitley was still very recently the official finance minister. The only reason he's not the official finance minister now is because of health. He remains the most influential minister in the government. And apart from being a finance minister, he's also one of the top legal brains of the establishment. So he's coming not just from a point of view of being an expert in financial matters, but also a matter of expert in investigation and criminality. For that stature for a man to write what he has written right now against an agency which is under the government's control itself is completely unprecedented. I can't recall another instance where the topmost minister of a government has actually written something as scathing and as direct as this against the CBI. And this, in many ways, puts a question mark on the credibility and even the process investigations, not only in the ICICI case, but actually in every case which involves high-profile names. Because remember, a lot of the cases, the general discourse seems to be that the CBI goes on a fishing expedition and is trying to fix people without having adequate evidence. This is something that has happened a lot in the past where convictions have not happened, or it's really just a question of selling somebody's image. Now that this minister, Mr. Jaitley, has said so openly in a blog, I've never ever, I can't recall a single instance like this happening in the past, Tanvi.
Yes, let me also quickly bring in Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay joining us on the phone line, consulting editor at Mint, very senior journalist, author of many books. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, I have a page that refers to the FIR, and I'm going to just read out an excerpt from the CBI FIR that was filed yesterday, which says that these loans amounting to 1,575 crores were sanctioned on various dates by various committees having senior officials of ICICI Bank as members, namely Sandeep Bakshi, K. Ramkumar, Sanjay Chatterjee, N.S. Kannan, Zareen Daruwala, Rajiv Sabharwal, K.V. Kamath and Homi Khusrokan. Now, these are not being named as accused, but the FIR mentions them as important people in the process. Do you think that is what Arun Jaitley is referring to in his blog?
Yeah, I think, I'm not getting into the merit of the case as such, but I would largely agree with his term called adventurism. Because if you see the past couple of years, I think 2017 was the first case when former IDBI Managing Director Mr. Agarwal and Chairman Mr. Agarwal and MD Batra was implicated by CBI, and if I'm not mistaken, they are arrested also. That is, if you see, this is the first case, and the last case I would like to believe is this FIR against former Punjab National Bank MD and CEO, who was later transferred to, as a sort of punishment, to Allahabad Bank, Usha Anantarana.
Yes.
So, and in between, there will be at least a dozen cases where the top-notch bankers, the chairman, the MD and CEOs have been either arrested or FIR being filed against, so on and so forth. But there is not a single case where actually, CBI could fix it. And all of them who were arrested were freed, and that's true about Maharashtra police also. The Bank of Maharashtra MD and CEO was arrested. And then later he had to be released, and police was actually scolded by others that they had no business to arrest. So the entire the so-called financial sector irregularities and the CBI and the other investigative agencies, they have not shown them in good light. And if you see the names, the entire Indian banking sector, somebody is in Standard Chartered Bank, somebody is in Goldman Sachs, somebody is in some other entities and all.
Well, one of them is the chief of the BRICS Bank.
That's right.
And so it's at a larger international level. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, I will request you to stay on with us, please, and we'll also hopefully have you live very quickly. Sanjay Hegde also joins us, senior advocate at this point of time from Ahmedabad. Shantanu Hussain, former joint director of CBI, also with me. Mr. Sen, here is the finance minister, not right now though, but still a union minister, who's telling the CBI to not be adventurous, to not get carried away with megalomania and to investigate in a professional way. One would think that if it has taken months after a PE was filed for the FIR to be filed, that the CBI has actually taken its time, done its due diligence before they file this. How are you reading these comments that have been made by a sitting minister? Mr. Sen, good evening. Can you hear me?
The former finance minister, now the minister without portfolio, is also a well-known criminal lawyer. In fact, he's also a civil lawyer. And he has been Additional Solicitor General of India way back in the 90s. So his words have to be taken with caution, care, and goodwill. What has he advised the CBI? concentrate on the I. If there is an offense, go after the actual offenders. And he's absolutely right here. There is some assumption by reading the FIR that CBI is also investigating all the members of the credit committee. I disagree. I entirely disagree. I will look at the names of the accused.
Yes.
In the FIR. FIR has been registered after 10 months of a preliminary inquiry, which, as you rightly said, means due diligence has been done. And thereafter, the case is actually registered against 3 individuals: Venugopal Dut, Deepak Kochar, and Chanda Kochar. These 3 are individuals who are accused, the rest are companies. Companies against companies, only Section 420, that is cheating, will lie. The corruption charges, the criminal misconduct, the pecuniary advantage will be all against the 3 individuals. And the CBI, in my view, is investigating these 3 persons. And there is good reason to investigate them because there is evidence of quid pro quo. 64 crores paid immediately after 300 crores was sanctioned is good prima facie material for considering the criminal activity of the persons. Therefore, the advice of the former finance minister is absolutely correct. The CBI should not ask criminal questions to the members of the credit committee. They will be examined as witnesses. They will explain what happened.
Yes.
How the alleged violations of the Banking Regulation Act, the RBI, and the credit policy have taken place, if at all. Even if the action was correct, there is no doubt that there has been a quid pro quo.
Yes.
There is also some evidence of 6% commission taken by Deepak Kochar. All that is criminal. So the advice of the former finance minister should be taken correctly by the CBI, and CBI should investigate those who are really acted criminally here.
Okay.
And the rest should be examined as prosecution witnesses.
Well, so they are not really being named as accused right now. Of course, the CBI only mentions that these are the people who are on these committees that approve the loans.
They are not named as accused.
They are not named as the accused. So then, Mr. Sanjay Hegde, good evening to you. Do you think the finance minister is fearing some kind of witch hunt in the banking sector, that maybe this is an attempt to protect further damage to the banking sector? Because, you know, he's literally right now raising questions on CBI's credibility or the way they go about an investigation at a time when the agency is already facing a crisis. And Arun Jaitley has himself multiple times spoken about the integrity and impartiality of this agency and the independence of this agency. So what happens when a sitting minister starts casting aspersions on the agency and their investigation, Sanjay Hegde?
Well, the one thing that definitely is bound to happen is that at a later stage, when the case progresses, the defense is going to have a lot of fun. The defense is going to say that the investigation was tainted, and none other than a man who was finance minister barely a few days prior also raised questions about the investigation. I must confess that I am a bit surprised that of all the investigations that the CBI has done so far, it is only this particular investigation which has caught the minister without portfolio's attention in his blogs. A lot of things that the CBI has done recently could well qualify as investigative adventurism. It certainly would not necessarily be professional investigation. Why is it that the first time that big money and the banking industry being involved and some so-called hitherto respected names in banking, when they are being investigated by a criminal investigation agency, that such a blog is written. It may be that sitting out there in the United States, there is a certain clarity in the ex-finance minister's thinking as to what constitutes investigative professionalism and investigative adventurism. But to my untrained mind and to my ear, I think this kind of investigation was long overdue. It is not as if the affairs within the ICICI Bank were unknown. There were whistleblowers. After that, there was an ethics committee within the bank which went into it. Much after that, while a PE was conducted over a certain period of time, finally an FIR has been launched. I don't see any rush to investigate in this matter.
Yes.
I don't see why the minister without portfolio should be so concerned about adventurism. It doesn't look like adventurism to me. It is with all due deliberation that the investigative agency has gone ahead, and I think it should be commended for it.
Okay, so two arguments have emerged here. Tamal Bandyopadhyay was speaking about the damage that's already been done to the banking sector, the numerous cases where top executives of various banks have been named, they've been shunted out, and in most of those cases right now, they've not come to a fruition. CBI has not been able to prove anything in court so far, which could be a reason why the the Arun Jaitley right now is warning CBI of showing a little bit of more caution and going down a specific targeted path. The other side, Vinay, of course, is to say, does he know something that we don't know? Why is he preempting where the CBI investigation is going to go? And if a top minister and somebody of the stature of Arun Jaitley makes such comments, does that then impact the future investigation?
So, Tanvi, the way I look at it is in three ways. Number one, I don't think when there is an FIR, it means that there is a prima facie assumption that the crime has, some kind of crime has been committed. That's why you will register an FIR, otherwise there should be no FIR. Now, in the event that an investigating agency or a government believes there is a prima facie evidence of some kind of crime, and if you register a case, there is no question of sectoral damage to be assessed. The only question to be assessed is, has a crime been committed or not? So I'm not sure the reputation or the background of individuals or the perceived threat to a particular sector should be a factor in investigating a crime. Now, in this case, that has happened. In the blog, the minister has clearly spoken about sectoral damage in the banking industry. If there are lots of frauds that have happened in the banking industry, they should be investigated and they should be criminally prosecuted as well, provided you have enough good quality evidence. Number one. Number two, my personal sense is, and in a very warped sense, this blog also tells you two other things. Number one, it is entirely possible to interpret this, that this kind of a blog is actually evidence of the fact that CBI works independently. And remember, this is happening at a time when there are lots of allegations on the CBI not working independently. This blog also tells you that the government is trying to distance itself from what has happened yesterday in terms of the FIR. Today we've seen an FIR in the BS Hooda case where virtually half of the real estate industry has been named in it as well. Some of the top builders and developers have been named in that as well. My only problem is that by doing this, there is another implication that is unwitting, and that implication is that an agency whose reputation and whose performance indications were at their rock bottom now get torn to shreds even further, because everything that he said in the blog tells you that the CBI indulges in adventurism, it goes on fishing expeditions, it doesn't bother about who all they are, whether they have evidence or not, but they still go ahead and indulge in all of that. And that to me is a little bit of a offset damage that you've caused to an agency that perhaps can't go any further down in terms of his reputation. Tanvi.
Okay, Mr. Shantanu Hussain, if you were the CBI officer in charge of this case, or if you were the interim CBI chief at this point of time, and you read this post, what would your response be? How would you then react to this situation?
See, there have been this view expressed here by by a member, well, probably that is his view. CBI, if I look at the case records, I find the CBI has done a preliminary investigation, and that is a safeguard. You will recall that this preliminary inquiry was upheld by the Supreme Court long ago as a safeguard.
We seem to have lost that feed with Mr. Sen. We're going to try and reconnect with him because we're unable to hear him. Let me just try and see if Mr. Bandyopadhyay can hear me. Tamal Bandyopadhyay, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so Mr. Bandyopadhyay, here is a brief profile, which of course you're well aware of, but just to put it out for our viewers also, of people who've not been named as accused in this case, but have been named in the FIR of those who were on the committees that approved the loans which are under question. You have Sandeep Bakshi, who's been named. He's, of course, the current MD and CEO who was brought in after Chanda Kochar, after much delay, was pushed out of the board. You have KB Kamath, who's the chief of the BRICS Bank right now. He's the man, literally, the biggest name we have in the banking sector. Who's done, literally expanded ICICI Bank. He's been on board and chief of several other big giants of India Inc. You then also have Homi Kusrokan, who's been the managing director of Tata Tea. He's been the special advisor to the board of Satyam Computer. He's linked to several big companies and has been on the boards of these companies. So there are big names. There is no denying that fact. But they're not being accused of anything. The FIR merely says that we will look into the fact that these are the loans that was cleared by committees that were headed by these people. Is that concerning? How is that going to be viewed by outsiders, by investors, by the entire business fraternity? Is that why you think the Arun Jaitley had to do this and come out with a blog post to distance the government from CBI actions?
Well, two things I would like to point out. One is this, of course, indeed, as I said earlier also, I think it is sort of misplaced adventurism, because over the last two year plus, I have not come across a single case where actually CBI has been able to fix the criminality or the culpability of any particular banker. There are many cases they have gone against the banker, they have arrested, they have filed FIR and all. I am not surprised that the entire board has been implicated. I will not name the person, but the CBI, what CBI has done to a former central banker. This former central banker, Indian central banker, very senior executive, he has been termed as a witness in a couple of cases, and there's a lookout notice against this central banker. I mean, he's not accused. There is nothing else happened about him, but by merely making him a witness, this former central banker has not been allowed to go out of India. He was intercepted at a particular airport while leaving the country last year, and he has been now, in India, he has not been allowed to go. Now, is there any allegation against him? No. That's the only single case. I mean, that's only one case. So there are many cases. I think the CBI, and if you see some of the FIR reports which I have gone through, it's very difficult to actually establish the kind of criminality which they have been talking about. Yes. In some other cases. I have not gone to this FIR report here. Yes. So there is absolutely, it's a case of adventurism. But only one thing is little interesting. I mean, it's little intriguing. I'm just pointing out, I'm not making any conclusion out of it. The first time CBI took, initiated action against Chanda Kochar for her alleged, whatever you call it, irregularities or misdemeanor and the quid pro quo, so on and so forth. I think in March 2018 it came to the light. At that point of time also, Arun Jaitley was away, not in India. I mean, probably was in India, but not was the finance minister. He was indisposed, he was not well. Yes. And the second instance where CBI has filed actually an FIR, again Mr. Jaitley is not the finance minister, he is away somewhere this time. So I'm not very sure, does it indicate something else also?
Yes. Well, that's
what I mean. I mean,
yeah.
I don't mean anything, but I'm just pointing out this interesting fact.
Yes, that is interesting, Vinay. And that brings us back to the question: Does the finance minister know something that we don't? Is there something else to this
Meaning,
apart
is it
from
a sort
just
of
advising the
difference of opinion
CBI?
within the government?
Yes, and I mean, is it something more than just advising the CBI how to do his job? Because they could have done it at any other point, like Sanjay Hegde said. I am though out of time, but I'm going to thank all our panelists because I know this was at very short notice, but I thought this was a post and a turn of events that should have been addressed, and we should try and understand what had just happened here, which is why we had to talk about it. Thank you to our panelists for joining us on such short notice. Now, one more interesting fact, this is not just Arun Jaitley, because if you go and look at the social media feeds right now, Piyush Goyal has retweeted Arun Jaitley's entire series of tweets. So Arun Jaitley has broken up his blog into 5-6 different tweets, and Piyush Goyal, who now has the additional charge of the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in absence of Arun Jaitley, has retweeted that. So maybe the government is trying to send out a message that the banking sector will be protected, that there will not be any brash, untoward harassment from the Premier Investigation Agency unless and until there is an actual wrongdoing. Because if you see Arun Jaitley's operative part of the blog, he speaks about the primary target and then going on a journey that goes to nowhere and everywhere. So maybe that's the message, not so much for the CBI, but for the rest of the world and to India Inc. and the banking sector, to the markets maybe, that don't worry, only the real culprits will be taken to book and not the rest. But of course, one must also ask the question that when you put out a post like this, are you also influencing the investigators on ground? Thank you so much for joining us on this debate.